students, welcome to our online session. I hope you all are keeping fine at home. So we are providing the online classes here for you so that you cannot miss your classes and your studies. So I am going to teach today the poem named as Marshlands, written by Pauline Johnson. This poem is actually from a point of a silent observer who actually sees the nature, the beauty of the nature, and admires the beauty of the nature very silently. The poetess doesn't even touch any of the things like the water or the grasses or the weeds, etc., but simply stands aside and admires the beauty of this particular marshland. Now let me ask you one question. What do you mean by marshland? Or where do you see the marshlands normally? You know, marshlands we see after the rainy seasons. Okay, most of the time when the areas are being flooded with the water, and after when the water washes away, we can see many of the land areas are accumulated with some type of waters. Okay, and some waters get accumulated here and there, and in between the grasses grows, the weeds grows, and small insects like frogs, tadpoles, etc. start breeding inside. So such areas we call it as a marshland. Now you might be thinking, what is the beauty in this marshland that the poet here admires it? Okay, let us go into the detail of the poem. Before that, let us learn something about the writer or the poetess. The poetess is Pauline Johnson, born on 10th March 1861 and lived till 1913. She is also known by her Mohawk stage named as Dion Kwage, that is in literature we speak it as a double life. She basically belonged to a Canadian poet. She was an author. She was also a performer who was very popular in the late 19th and the 20th centuries. Her father was a hereditary Mohawk chief and her mother was an English immigrant. So she mostly writes about the poems related to the nature during her life in the USA, and her language proficiency she got it from her mother. So let us try to understand this poem from the point of the poetess or from her perspective. The poem is actually divided into 3 stanzas of 4 lines, which we call it as a quatrain. That means each stanza is having 4 lines, which we call it as a 1 quatrain. In that sense, there are 3 quatrains of the 4 lines, and the last 2 lines we call it as a couplet. And this type of poem with the 14 lines, that is 3 quatrains and a couplet, we call it as a sonnet. So I will explain to you more about the sonnet at the end of this poem. So are you all ready with me? I request you all to take your textbooks and keep if required, otherwise listen carefully. So let us read the poem first. A thin wet sky that yellows at the rim and meets with sun lost lip, the marshes brim, the pools low lying dank with moss and mould, glint through their mild dews like large cups of gold. So here we have the poem begins with the line, a thin wet sky that yellows at the rim. Now you can see that we have never seen a sky wet, isn't it? You have seen the land wet, you have seen the floor wet, but have you ever seen the sky wet? Then what indication that the poetess gives us by telling that it's a thin wet sky that yellows at the rim. Rim here is actually meaning the edge of the sky. Now you know, whenever you have looked at a water body, whether it's a river, a sea or an ocean, especially before the sunset time, you might have seen that the red rays of the sun setting are actually reflected in the water. Okay, and we have very brilliant scenarios like that. So that means, but still we feel like the sun has touched the water land on the sea or in the river or in the ocean, etc. But there is a hairline difference. Okay, that is what is the poetess is trying to admire. When she looks at the marshland, she sees that the marshland is having a very thin wet sky. That means the reflection of that sky that has turned yellowish just before the time of the sunset has come to the edge of the water, and if it is meeting the water there, and meets with the sun lost lip the marshes brim. Brim means towards the full of a particular container. Suppose you are having a glass of water and it is completely filled till the top, you call it as a brim. Okay, so here the poetess says that the thin wet sky that yellows at the rim, here means at the edge of the sky, is actually meeting with the sun's lost lip that marshes brim. So it is actually meeting at the top of the head of the marshland, where it seems that it is meeting with the sky. The pools low lying, dank with moss and mould. And what about the pools here? The pools means the water body, the water element there inside the marshland actually is low lying. It is very, it's not flowing water, it is a stagnant water there, and it's not flowing, and it is in a very lower, shallower side of the land, and it's dank with mosses and mould. And even you can see dank here represents to the unpleasantly wet and the cold, mosses and mould. Now mosses here refers to the algae. You can see the small weeds that grow inside the marshy land with the dirt and the soil, and they completely cover the upper layers, giving a very green layer of algae in the water. Okay, so that is what you call it as a algae, means we call in Hindi kai. Okay, so the pools low lying, dank with moss and mould. So the pools means the water content which is available in that marshland is almost covered with the mosses, and they are molded with the grass and the weeds and other algae, glint through their mild dews like large cups of gold. Now even when that reflection of the sunlight, the sun's lost lip, that sunlight before the setting of the sun flashes upon these mosses and the molds, they actually give a great shining, and it appears to be like a large cup of the gold. So from this we can understand that the first line actually describes the sky that looks down over the top of the marshes. It is very thin and wet, and as if at any moment it could break open and storm. The edges of the blue, or more likely grey, are tinged with yellow, means mixed with yellow, and the color runs around the rim and ends where the sun has dipped down below the brim. A reader is now aware that the sun has almost vanished from the sky, and it appears as if a storm is about to drench the land. So here the poetess explains, looking at the sky, the sun, and looking at the marshes and that yellow tinges of the reflection of the sunlight, its glow, its shining on the marshland, shows that it's about to vanish away from the sky, and all of the sudden the sky turns into very grayish and dark, as if it is going to have a heavy storm, and it is completely going to immerse itself or dip itself into the land. So this is what is the explanation of the stanza 1. So let us move to second stanza, that is lines from 5 to 8. Among the wild rice in the still lagoon, in monotone the lizard shrills his tune, the wild goose homing seeks a sheltering, where rushes grow and oozing lichens cling. So among the wild rice in the still lagoon. Now still lagoon here, what do you mean by lagoon? Lagoon means it's a lake of sea water that is partly separated by the sea or some rocks or even by some sand. Okay. So among the wild rice in the still lagoon, in monotone the lizard shrills his tune. Monotone, mono means what? Mono means single, tone voice. So in a single voice, you can even hear the lizards shrill, making sounds, the shrill sounds of the lizard, and they are singing as if in a particular tune. The wild goose homing seeks a sheltering, and the wild goose who is trying to home themselves, means trying to seek a secured place for themselves like a home. They are wandering here and there to seek a sheltering, where rushes grow and oozing lichens scream. And even where the rushes means it's a type of weed or grass that grows in the marshlands, and oozing lichens, and you can see small snails, and lichens are small aquatic animals or insects that keeps on clinging to each other. So here in the second stanza, the poetess mainly explains that the lizard, which is said to be shrill in his tune, the animal is actually here personified. Personification means it's a figure of speech that we make use to describe the inanimate object or sound to familiarize or similarize it with the human qualities or human sounds, features, etc. So the animal is faintly personified as its small cries are described as being musical in nature. That is why its monotonous shrill tune is mentioned. Now normally when we talk about the tune, music, it is mostly related to the human beings and the birds, but here the lizards, that shrill voice of making sound is actually compared to a very beautiful piece of music in nature. This actually elevates it to a level above what one would normally regard a lizard on. Next, the speaker describes another animal, that is the wild goose. It is homing, means what? The creature is single-minded in its quest to seek a shelter. Now every animal seeks its shelter some or other. So here the wild goose is also trying to seek its shelter, and it knows that somewhere in among us the rushes or the long grasses and the oozing lichens, there is somewhere it can rest. So here the animals, like they are used here in the sense of the personification, their sounds and their homing. Homing is a nature, normally homing, the word we use it for when we refer to the human being, but if we are referring the home of any animal or a bird, we call it as a habitat. So here the poetess uses that word homing to personify, to give the human quality or personified to that quality of a goose finding a shelter or a home for itself. Okay, now we'll come to the next stanza, that is late cranes with the heavy wing and lazy flight sail up the silence with the nearing night, and like a spirit swathed in some soft veil steals twilight and its shadows over the swale. Hushed lie the sedges and the vapors creep, thick, grey and humid, while the marshes sleep. Now in this slide you can see there are 6 lines, and the last 2 lines, that is hushed lie the sedges and the vapors creep, thick, grey and humid, while the marshes sleep. These are the 2 concluding lines of the poem, which we call it as a couplet. Couple means 2, couplet means 2 lines, and above that we can see this is a 3rd quatrain. Late cranes with heavy wing and lazy flight. Now the poetess keeps on staring or observing more carefully the marshland, and now she sees the late cranes which are having very huge wings and lazy flight, and because of their heavy wings they are not actually feeling to fly. Sail up the silence with the nearing night, and they were just sailing upon that marshland's water body and during this approaching night time, and like a spirit swathed in some soft veil. Now what they are doing, they are actually like a spirit, they are swathing in the soft veil. Soft veil here, swathing here actually refers to covered. Okay, they are actually covered in the soft veil. What is a soft veil here? Veil is something that you use to cover. Now normally you might have seen many of our ladies in the Muslim community, our sisters, what they used to do, they used to put a veil in front of their face. Okay, they cover their face, that you call it as a veil. So veil is something that is used to cover it. Now here how this is associated, and like a spirit swathed in some soft veil, means like a spirit here, the huge wings of the cranes are actually used to cover the softness of that marshland, okay, and steals twilight and it shadows over the swale. Now what does it does here? It steals the twilight means the just before the time, before after the sunset and before it gets night, okay, that time we call it as a twilight. Now that will be completely, the sky will be reddish or yellowish in color and mostly red and blackish also, because it's the onset of the night also. So it steals twilight and it shadows over the swale. So here the poetess says that towards this end of the poem, the night is coming more strongly, means that time of the transformation from the time of the sunset to the time of the darkness getting night, actually there is a transformation. So it, as time passes on, it becomes more and more darker. So the narrative has progressed to the setting of the sun to the nearing night. Now it is under the silence of the sky that the late cranes are flying lazily. So the late cranes are flying back to their home. Now in the evening time you can see flock of birds together, they are flying back to their nest, isn't it? Back to their home. So the same scenario is being explained here. Above the marshlands, which the late cranes spread their wings and cover the marshlands, and they keep on flying. So they are sailing up. Normally the word sail we use when we talk about the boat sail, the the ship's sail, etc. But here the poetess use the word sailing because the way the late cranes are also flying very lazily, very softly moving their wings as if they are covering the marshland, but they are not diving into the water, but they are sailing above the marshland. From the marshlands to fly, and now where they are flying, to the fly in the peace of the evening. So this evening, that peaceful moment, that peaceful time, where almost it is the time of everyone to stop their work and get back to their home, whether it's animals or birds, etc. Okay, even we people also, by the night time we stop all our work and we go back to sleep. So that's the time of the silence developing there. Okay, so there is no rush evident in their actions. That means no one is hurry. So even if you just observe the flock of birds in the evening time, you can see very smoothly they are sailing up. There is no bustle, there is no noise, there is no hurry, etc. So with very patiently, taking much enough time, they are sailing back to their nest. So they move without pretense or any particular pressing need. Okay. So now we will discuss to the last lines, that is the couplet, which is very important part of the sonnet. Hushed lies the sedges and the vapors creep, thick, grey and humid, while the marshes sleep. So the poetess tried to conclude her whole poem. Now actually this couplet is like a summarizing what all things are being explained in the other three stanzas and giving a conclusion to the final feelings and expressions that the poetess actually feels here. So here the poetess says that hushed lies the sedges and the vapors creep, thick, grey and humid, while the marshes sleep. So here in this couplet the poet is actually trying to describe how the night is taking over the land. It is not malevolent or foreboding in any way. Means it is a part of the nature described, or nature has set like that. It is described as being like a spirit that moves very slowly. The darkness comes over the land and takes away the remaining bits of twilight. Now there are shadows over the swale or the low valleys in mostly the flash marshes. And the final couplet here, hush takes over the sedges. Means sedges actually means a plant that grows in wetlands. Now hush means what? It along with all other creatures and organic elements of the marsh is silent. Hush means what? Keep silence. If you have gone to any hospitals or any places like that, you can see the posters of a child keeping the finger on the mouth is displayed. Actually it shows to keep the silence. Okay, so here in the final couplet the poetess is actually speaking like this, that hushed lie the sedges. Sedges means a plant that grows in the wetlands. So there is a complete silence. Even the croaking of the frogs are not heard. The clinging of the lichens or the sound of moving them is not unheard. Even the cricket making the noise in the evening time is unheard. That means there is a complete silence there. It, along with all the other creatures and organic elements of the marsh, is silent. So this silence is covered upon everything that is there in the marshland, whether it is creatures, whether it is an insects, or whether it is weeds, grasses, etc. So that whole scenario is completely filled with the silence. The air is thick, grey and humid. Now the air becomes thick in the sense it is getting thicker, because as night approaches the air becomes more stronger. Grey and humid. Humid means completely greyish and humid. The pressing down on the marshes as they sleep. Now it feels like this air and the greyish climatic condition or the atmosphere is actually making the marshland to sleep, to take rest. So that it's the time, night time, and the marshland has to, or the creatures in the marshland, including the plants, insects, weeds, etc., have to stop their activities and rest or go to sleep. When morning comes, the great variety of life will become active once more. So again, when the next morning comes, that is, while the marshes sleep, and until they will be sleeping till the next morning comes, they wake up with great enthusiasm, energetic, live and active, and have a lot of tasks for them to do in the next morning. So they will become once again active more, even the marshes who take rest at night, okay, and next day they will be becoming more active. So I hope that you understood all the lines of the poem and the explanation. Here are the glossary, the words and its meanings given. So I ask you, all of you, to take down the meanings in your copies. And now let us discuss a brief discussion about the sonnet. Sonnet is actually a kind of lyrics with a specific structure. It consists of 14 lines. This is mostly introduced and used by the Shakespeare. He himself has written the sonnets, and which are very famous all over the world. Now besides Shakespearean sonnets, we also have the Petrarchan sonnets, means written by the poet named as Petrarch, which follows a different pattern but having some close connection to the Shakespearean sonnet. Okay. Now the structure of the sonnet is that it has 3 quatrain. A quatrain has 4 lines, means 3 stanzas of 4 lines. That means 4 multiplied by 3 is equal to, totally there will be 12 lines. And a couplet means concluding line, means 2 lines, okay, with some message or the moral. Now what is the message or the moral which we have read in this poem? It actually gives us a message like that every creature on the earth, whether it is nature itself or the human being or the animals or the birds, etc., they all have to be following that routine of the nature, that by the evening time, by the night time, you take rest, you bid farewell to all your activities of the day, and you sleep well, and in the next morning you wake up energetically and you continue with your task and the routine more actively, more enthusiastically, etc. Okay. So now this sonnets again we see that it has following a particular rhyme scheme, that is each quatrain has a particular rhyme scheme, A, B, B, A, which we see because the first word last word rhymes with the second line's last word. For example, you can see rim, brim, gold, mold, flight, night, creep, sleep, whale, swale. So if you check it out into the each and every line of the poem, you will be getting a good number of the words which are rhyming with each other. So in the couplet, the poetess concludes some rhyming words which we have discussed just now. So what did you understand by the rhyming scheme here? Means words with similar sounds or in pronunciation, we call it as the one word is rhyming with the another word. Okay. So and when most of the poems, normally the last words in the line rhymes with each other. So I hope that you understood this poem very well, and I request you to have a good reading, keep watching the videos, and don't quit your studies or don't spoil your routine. We have talked about the routine. So every work, everything has a time. Sleep well, eat well, and also study well. Thank you. We'll meet tomorrow with the next topic.